regards the internal market within the UK, there's maximum certainty for businesses, and of course we will legislate to that effect, and ultimately we will take every measure necessary to protect the integrity of the United Kingdom and comply and live up to and ensure that the Good Friday Agreement is respected. I'm surprised she's not supporting that.
Lisa Nunley.
Mr Speaker, he clearly doesn't read the newspapers because his own government has been briefing the precise opposite. Let me try him on another international obligation. An international arbitration ruling determined that the UK owes a debt to Iran which has not yet been paid. In a letter to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's family last week, the Defence Secretary said the UK acknowledges there is a debt to be paid and is seeking to find ways to pay it. It is absolutely vital that the government has a clear and agreed strategy for Nazanin, for Anousheh Ashouri and for all dual UK nationals to ensure they're brought home as soon as possible. So can I ask him if he agrees with the Defence Secretary, and if so, what steps is he now taking to resolve these heartbreaking cases?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady? And I can tell the House that I had 2 conversations throughout August with Foreign Minister Zarif. We pursue all of the cases of our dual nationals. The question of the IMS debt is a parallel issue, but we've always said that we've worked to resolve that issue. And we absolutely, as well as all the wider issues that have already been raised in relation to Iran, there is never an engagement or a meeting or a telephone conversation that doesn't go by without us making absolutely clear, and I hope that she agrees, the appalling and arbitrary detention of all dual nationals and call for their immediate release.
Mr Blunt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With his much enhanced departmental responsibilities, together with Britain's current chairmanship of the 42-nation Equal Rights Coalition, my right honourable friend has an unprecedented opportunity to reinforce Britain's claim to leadership in advancing the freedom of all LGBT+ people around the world to be themselves. Britain also has a special responsibility to address the unhappy legacy of the laws and the culture bequeathed by Imperial Britain. What measures is my right honourable friend considering for global Britain to take this opportunity, as well as helping address the legacy of Imperial Britain?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend. I'm hugely welcome all of his efforts in this regard. We are taking forward all of these strands, from media freedom to the Magnitsky sanctions to the work that we're doing on LGBT rights. He will know that we intend to build on our current ODA allocation for the strategic review on LGBT rights, which will be completed in the autumn. I can also tell him that as a founding member of the Equal Rights Coalition of 42 states sharing the same values, that in 2019 we took on the role of co-chair, and we plan to deliver the first ever UK-led 5-year action plan committing the coalition to take domestic and international measures on LGBT and equality issues, but also to expand the ERC, in particular to try and draw in more participation from Asia, Latin America and Africa for all the reasons that he mentioned.
Chris Hull.
There's clearly a global effort, Mr Speaker, to find a vaccine and indeed treatments for people suffering from COVID-19. But can I ask what representations the Foreign Secretary or any of his ministers have made about trying to tackle disinformation in relation to vaccines or disinformation for finding false cures for COVID-19? There does really need to be a global effort in tackling the ticking time bomb that is disinformation.
Secretary.
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman? He's right to point out that the UK has a comparative advantage internationally with the research that's going on, Oxford Imperial in pursuit of the vaccine, and also the leadership the Prime Minister showed at the Gavi Summit to smash all the records to get $8.8 billion worth of funding so to ensure equitable access to the whole world. Good for the United Kingdom. We don't want a second wave globally, but also important as a matter of moral responsibility. On misinformation, we've discussed it in the G7 and plenty of other formats, and he's absolutely right that we must be absolutely rigorous and robust in rebutting false information, particularly about something as irresponsible as vaccine safety standards.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I draw my right honourable friend's attention to the exchange of correspondence between me as chairman of the liaison committee and our right honourable friend, the leader of the House, about the continuing scrutiny of the overseas aid budget? Can I welcome the fact that government seems to have withdrawn its proposal simply to merge the DFID Select Committee with the Foreign Affairs Select Committee? What possible justification could there be for any reduction in scrutiny by Parliament of this very substantial and complicated budget?
Can I thank my honourable friend and pay tribute to the work he does. He's one of the leading parliamentarians and select committee members and indeed chairs. In relation to the select committee representation, it is the normal position that the government takes that they ought to shadow the government departments. But having said that, it is ultimately for the House to decide. I welcome all the scrutiny, and he will know that in relation to IKI, we have not only affirmed its role in providing scrutiny and accountability on aid decisions, but I want to review it to make sure that it is focused on what adds the most value and to make sure that their critical analysis is followed by practical recommendation.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, the Government did embark on and has rushed through an unnecessary and expensive merger of the FCO and DFID right at the time when UK aid is needed most overseas. And despite repeated requests from my office, it appears that the Government either doesn't know what the merger will cost or is not willing to say. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm whether or not any estimate of merger costs was made prior to the merger's announcement in June?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? Can I just first say, on her issue of timing, I think COVID has shown precisely why we need to integrate more in relation to our international endeavours. I think that was true in relation to the combination between research for a vaccine, the Gavi summit and the misinformation that was asked earlier. And in relation to the cost of the merger, we would envisage that, notwithstanding that our commitment to 0.7%, over the long term, in the course of the CSR, we can make considerable savings on administrative costs as we streamline and fuse and synergise the various different aspects of the previous departments.
Sean Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that Cornwall Council having a staffed office in Brussels is a good use of taxpayers' money at this time when it could be spent on local services?
I thank my honourable friend. It is a curious decision since we've left the EU to have an operation overseas. Well, we have a global network of 280 overseas posts which represent all parts of the UK, including Cornwall. But the decision to operate overseas is one for Cornwall Council, and ultimately the voters of Cornwall, who I'm sure will want to have a say on whether this is a good idea and a good use of their taxpayers' money at the next local elections.
Heading to Ealing with Mr Virendra Sharma. Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This summer, I hosted the British South Asian Youth Summit, bringing together more than 150 young people from across South Asia and Britain. They discussed the future, wrote an MOU, and agreed to work together. Will the Secretary of State meet with me and some of the young people to hear their proposals and offer the support of his network to support the positive cause of promoting understanding and engagement in the region?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for an exceptional endeavour and pay tribute. We ought to, as we depart the EU and forge our way in the world, have stronger relationships with that part of the world. I'd be very interested in receiving directly the proposals and the ideas, and would make sure that either myself or the Minister for the region meets with him and those involved.
Theresa Villiers.
The UN embargo on the sale of conventional weapons to Iran expires in October. Unless it's extended, Iran will no doubt have more access to weapons to oppress their own people and spread death and terror through proxies like Hezbollah. So why did the UK abstain on a resolution to extend the embargo, and what action is he going to take to make sure it stays in place?
Secretary.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? She will know that the resolution that was tabled failed by 15 votes. In fact, it only garnered two votes in the UN Security Council. The UK's position was very clear. We want to see the continuation of the arms embargo. It's got to get through the Security Council. As frustrating as that may be, we've offered our good offices, and indeed if time had been allowed from the original tabling of the resolution between a vote, we had offered with the E3 to work with all the permanent members of the Security Council to try and find a compromise. Ultimately, I just have to say, unless the resolution can pass, it has no impact in restraining Iran.
Let's head to Manchester with Abdul Khan. Abdul Khan.
Mr. Speaker, nearly 80% of the Uyghur Muslim population has vanished since 2016, either as a result of detainment in concentration camps or forced disappearance. The Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales has detailed disturbing covert drone footage showing Uyghur blindfolded and taken onto trains. In light of this, will the Secretary of State outline what steps his departments are taking to hold the Chinese government to account for these heinous crimes? And will he confirm today that the government will call for an impartial international investigation into what is taking place in Xinjiang?
Minister.
I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He's absolutely right to raise it. We have serious concerns about gross human rights violations being perpetrated against Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, including the extrajudicial detention of over 1 million Uyghur Muslims and other minorities in political re-education camps, as they've been referred to. We are playing a leading role in holding China to account for its widespread violation of human rights. And on the 30th of June, the UK led a joint statement on behalf of 27 other countries at the UN Human Rights Council about the situation in Xinjiang. And the Foreign Secretary, finally, Mr. Speaker, has again raised Xinjiang with his Chinese counterpart, the Foreign Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The JCPOA deal did not include terms relating to Iran's financing of terrorism and development of ballistic missiles. As Iran appears to have both breached its nuclear commitments and allowed the IRGC to intervene violently across the region, does my right honourable friend agree that a new deal addressing these issues is vitally needed?
I thank my honourable friend. He will know that, along with our E3 colleagues, we have triggered the dispute resolution mechanism for the JCPOA on the nuclear side. It has always been the case that the JCPOA did not encompass the wider destabilising activities that Iran engages in the region through militias, through proxies, and we've always been open and willing, and indeed pressing, to try and incorporate a bigger agreement. But I think it's also right to say that until we've got a scope for that wider agreement, the JCPOA is what we've got. It provides the vehicle for some kind of restraint on Iran, although I accept that it has been eroded because of systemic non-compliance, and we'd be reluctant to move to something bigger until it is in place, and not lose sight of what the JCPOA adds.
Final question, Margaret Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been 2 years since President Mnangagwa took office in Zimbabwe, yet progress in human rights reform has been non-existent. In the past year alone, 70 critics of the Zimbabwean government have been abducted and tortured by security forces. What steps is the FCDO taking to engage with the Zimbabwean authorities to progress reforms and ensure that those responsible for human rights violations are brought to justice?
Secretary.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady and share her concern about the situation in Zimbabwe. We follow it very carefully. We engage with our international partners as well as directly with the government of Zimbabwe, and we of course do now have the tools, if the evidence allows and we decide it's the right thing to do, working with our partners to apply targeted sanctions on those who commit the most egregious human rights abuses.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.